Hi, Jim.
Hey Gary, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing
I'm
very
just
well. It's good to see you. I didn't expect to see you tonight, so this is
well. I'm here as a spectator. And it signed me up as a panelist, so I have to. I'll just be quiet. Yeah,
well, this is a great surprise. Thank
yeah.
you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing
Good.
really well.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Talk
we're
to
happy to be working with you guys on this.
Yeah, yeah. Leah's pleased, I'm sure. Talk to you later.
Okay. See you later, Gary.
Okay, I think we're ready. It's 6:30, Leah, right? We're online, we're good? Okay, so we're gonna call to order the joint work session with the Portsmouth Planning Board and the Portsmouth Zoning Board of Review. So as far as the roll call, I'll state that all members of the planning board are present. And I'd like to ask the vice chair of the zoning board maybe to identify what members for the record are present from the zoning board. Great, thank you. All right, so we should turn it back over to you, Leah.
Good evening, everybody. I am here as the town planner and I have been working very closely with Jim Reardon, our planning consultant with Weston and Sampson. Jim is pretty wide known in town because our former town planner, Gary Crosby, had used Jim to help finalize and get our comprehensive community plan past the finish line, and Jim was very helpful in that regard. So we have been working with Jim to help us get this Rhode Island Housing Grant in the amount of just under $100,000 to help us get all these state regulations that were passed in June of last year. There were 13 bills that state legislators pushed through in terms of housing, land use laws that had to get imposed. Most of them hit the ground running on January 1st. Both Aaron Lindo, the assistant planner, had given a high-level review to the zoning board back in November, and I also presented a very high-level review of the changes also in October and November. You probably already forgot them. Now, Jim is here to literally explain them right from the beginning. And unfortunately for you guys, we're going to have another special planning board meeting next week, which we will also invite the zoning board to and peel back the onion, so to speak, and go a little bit deeper and deeper into the review process and physically give you a high level review tonight, but also explain why the changes are happening. And
Can I just ask one question?
Yes.
So part of our process, if I recall, is so Jim and yourself will, after we get this educational piece done and the overview, you'll actually do the heavy lifting
The heavy
piece
lifting.
and then come back to us
Yes,
to review it. Got it.
yes.
Thank you.
So with that little introduction, I did pass out to everybody. I apologize for not having any extra packets. I gave everybody the presentation that Jim is going to walk through tonight. I'm gonna basically turn it over to him, and then I do know at the end of the presentation, which is expected to be about 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes, I don't know, there will be a question and answer period. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Reardon.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hitchens. I'm Jim Reardon. I'm from Weston and Sampson. Let's see, I'm trying to share, but it says the host disabled participant screen sharing. So I
Oh,
need to
no, not that.
enable.
Hold on.
Sure.
Try that, Jim.
Okay, let's see. Yep, this seems to be working now. All right, I'm going to try and do this in presentation mode if the system will cooperate. Let's see, it looks like it's working, but it's a little hard for me to tell. Is that
It is on our screen.
great?
You can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So first off, welcome. I very happy to be here this evening and look forward to working with you all on this project. As I mentioned, I'm from Weston and Sampson. My name's Jim Reardon. I'm the team leader of the planning group there. And we're doing this for a number of different communities, including Portsmouth, of course, through the Rhode Island Housing MTAP program. That's the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. They've made grants available, including this one. And so we're helping at this point, I think 12 communities out with doing these kind of updates through that program, which is great to be able to do. So again, we're very happy to be here this evening and to be working with all of you. As Leah mentioned, there are a number of required revisions to the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. These are required by new legislation that was passed by the General Assembly. And tonight we will go over what the project overview, the basic scope of work here and timeline is for this project, a summary of the enabling legislation amendments, and then a review of some specific changes that are required here. We'll get into more detail about those over the course of a couple of different working sessions, but we want to whet your appetite this evening. And then we'll discuss some of the related policy decisions that you'll be making. Not this evening necessarily. It's not expected to happen this evening, but we wanted again to sort of whet your appetite a little bit, give you an idea of what's coming, and so that you have that in mind when these come up during the more specific work sessions later on. So first, a general project overview. We've taken an approach here, a two-tiered sort of approach to the legislation updates. And I'll explain more of that as we go along. But in general, the tier 1 requirements are things that have required changes in them where you folks need to make decisions about how to move forward with them. Pardon me. And that if you don't make those decisions in a timely fashion, then it becomes unclear how your development process works. The tier 2 changes, these are also required changes, but they're very specific in the state statutes, so that if you didn't make these changes right away, that they would take effect anyways. So you know, while it's important to make the changes at the local level, we think it's important to have that information in your enforceable policy, your ordinances, your regulations, and other enforceable policy. It's important to have that in there for clarity and so that the applicants know what's going on. If it wasn't in there, it would default to the state statutes anyways, the state requirements anyways. And so, you know, effectively, it doesn't have a major impact on how things get regulated at the local level. We're using the Rhode Island housing templates to go through this process. We were fortunate enough to be hired by Rhode Island Housing to help create these templates. And one of the people that's on our staff, Ashley Sweet, she was actually quite intimately involved in the process of putting these templates together and in the process of responding to this legislation so through Rhode Island Housing, so that you folks at the local level would have as clear a process as possible to move forward with. Now, I will say, you know, regardless of best efforts to make this as clear and straightforward as possible, there are a number of, I guess I'll call them hitches in the process, conflicts in the language, sometimes lack of clarity in certain parts of the language. Unfortunately, at the moment, those are things that we have to live with. Again, they were passed at the state level, and you know, we can't really affect that process because that's through your state representatives and senators and so on. But we can try and help interpret them for you and help you through the process. We understand that the state is kind of preparing a punch list of those items and is hoping to try and address them in the next legislative session. So hopefully we'll get a little clarity as we move along here. But for now, you know, we want to make sure that you're protected as best as possible and that you have, you know, the best, you know, the strongest standing policy moving forward through this process. There's a process of public input and local board and commission input. Local board and commission input is happening right now, starting this evening. Public input is the public process that you folks use at your local level to adopt changes to your regulations and to your ordinances. So that would be your standard sort of input process, for lack of a better way to put it. So how do we get there? How do we accomplish all this? So there's a local regulatory review that we've already begun, and drafting of regulatory language, which we've begun as well. When we're saying regulatory language, we mean both your regulations and your zoning ordinance. So subdivision regulations and zoning ordinance, and any of the sort of related policy like checklists that might have the effect of regulation, but aren't technically part of regulation. So we'll go through that process, and once we have drafts together, which of course we'll vet with you, those will go to public hearing for adoption. They'll go through an adoption process, and then you will have accomplished the business of addressing these statutory updates. Now, we know that the town is also planning on doing a more comprehensive overhaul of your development policy, and that will happen subsequent to this. So we know this needs to get done by the end of June. You know, if that doesn't happen, there are consequences in that, you know, your regulation becomes unclear, sort of what certain standards might be and what certain processes might be, and whether the state runs it or whether the local, you know, whether your municipality runs it. We don't want that to happen to you, so we're moving through the process as quickly as we can, you know, in anticipation of that June 30 deadline that's in state statute. And so here is a timeline, and this indicates a couple of different things. So it indicates specific tasks that are necessary to get to the finish line here. and it splits them up so that you can see the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 processes. The tier 1 processes, those are where there are local decisions that need to be made. Those are up on the top. And then the tier 2, those are the bills where if you didn't include that policy in your local regulations, the state statutes would take effect anyways. But again, we want to make sure all this stuff gets in there by June 30th, or in advance of that, if that was possible, to protect your municipality. Okay, I'd like to go through an overview of the changes that we're talking about right now. So, excuse me, we'll begin with tier 1. Again, if these changes are not made at the local level to respond to the state law will override local regulations and the ordinances, and there may be repercussions and issues because of, frankly, some of the gaps that leaves in the regulatory fabric. And again, we don't want to see that happen. There are a number of bills Leah mentioned earlier. I think there are 13 of them. And some of these are listed on this slide. We'll go through, there are a couple more slides of these. But they include the bill number on the left here, as well as the title of it, then whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, and potential deliverables that come out of this process. So for the inclusionary zoning, there really isn't a deliverable in that, but as we go through these, you'll see state law language for insertion. So that's on the zoning special use permits and variances and mergers. That's a tier 1. One of the things that we'll need to do as part of this process is come up with specific categories and specific standards for special use permits. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The subdivision of land bill that is H6061A. So that includes state law language for insertion. When we're saying state law language for insertion, we mean there are some things that you're strictly required to insert, and you don't really have a lot of choice in the matter. So there's some of that here, but there are also updated checklists for minor subdivision, minor land development, major land development, and development plan review that need your input. And those things are sort of mingled together, so they're all included under tier 1. H6090A, adaptive reuse. So again, some more language for specific insertion, but then there is language to amend your existing ordinance language, which will need some of your input on it. 6060, so this is the land use court. This is a tier 2 bill, and I should have begun at the top here. So, as I was mentioning before, tier 2, if changes are not made at the local level to respond to the state law will simply override the local regulations and the ordinance, and there will be little or no consequence from that. It's somewhat untested, but our understanding is that, state law would override it, and that's how things would be implemented. But again, for clarity and other reasons, we want to make sure that those things get included in your local regulatory fabric. So going back here to the individual bills, 660, that's the land use court, and there is state language for insertion on that. H6081, which is the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. And that has some language for, that has specific language amendments that are required. The next one is SHAB, or the State Housing, excuse me, I've lost track of what I was saying here. But this eliminates the state, the State Board of Appeals at the state level, and it refers everything now to Superior Court at the state level. And so as a result of that, SHAB is eliminated. That was the State Housing Appeals Board. That's what SHAB stands for. TOD, so that's Transfer of Development Rights. This is a pilot sort of program. So it's unclear exactly how this program will be enacted or how it'll look until it's actually created. And so we'll work with you on, you know, what aspects of that you want to include. Comprehensive planning. So there is specific state language that changes the way comprehensive plans work, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Noticing requirements, so public noticing requirements have changed somewhat. It's very specific how those have changed, so it's really just an insertion process into your regulations and your ordinance, and it'll be the same for both now. 6061 and 6059, these are definitions of various things, and they're just simply required as they are defined in state law. So now we'll go through some of the individual items that I mentioned here. And as we go through these, with each of the sections, I'll mention some specific issues that you'll need to address as we go through the project. So again, not tonight, but we did want to let you know what was coming down the line here. So the notice requirements, again, these are very prescriptive, very, you know, very specific in the law, and they're going to require that you provide newspaper notices, and that the newspaper notices, you know, those were required before, but that the newspaper notices are of local rather than general circulation in the municipality. This is a distinction that's not clearly defined in the legislation, so we have some questions about that, frankly, but the law requires that you adopt the language as it is. So we'll, you know, that'll hopefully get defined better as we move forward with this. But again, that'll just need to be adopted wholesale. As I mentioned before, the requirement is the same, whether it's for zoning or whether it's for your subdivision regulations. You're also required to make a posting on your municipal website. Provides notice to abutters that it shall be sent by first class instead of the previously required certified mail. So this reduces costs a little bit and makes the process a little bit simpler, I suppose. You can imagine it has some benefits and disadvantages to it. But again, it is required, and you really have to do it the way the state says you have to do it. This bill also standardizes notices across all types of application, zoning, planning, etc. As I was mentioning before, the same methods and timeframes are required. Judicial proceedings. So this falls under a bill title called Judicial Proceedings and Land Use. This again consolidates. It consolidates a couple of bills together, which is why two bills are listed here for both the House, 2 bills for the House and 2 for the Senate. And what it does essentially, it refers matters directly to Superior Court if they're being appealed, and it abolishes the State Housing Appeals Board. Let's see. So some more specifics about this. This bill establishes a calendar in the State Superior Court that's dedicated solely to these kind of appeals. However, it eliminates SHAB. So on the one hand, it sets a sort of a specific partition, if you will, for the Superior Court to hear these matters, but it eliminates the board that was previously hearing them. So hopefully there will, there will be efficiency in this process. But again, it's a state requirement. It's nothing that we have control over. This provides for expedited decisions of these matters. And appeals that are still being filed with SHAB up until December 31st of this past year, so 2023. Those were still allowed after these things were passed. These new laws took effect over the summer, and so it was possible that there were some appeals being made. But any of those things that were filed before December 31, they get transferred to the Superior Court, and by way of filing a complaint within 60 days of January 1. This sets forth the Superior Court's standard of review for appeals related to the comprehensive permit applications, which generally aligns with the standard of the previously existing SHAB. Comprehensive plan implementation. So this requires more specific implementation program through the creation of a strategic plan. And by that, what it means is that you have specific goals, policies, and actions that are clearly laid out. This is something we actually helped you folks with the development of your comprehensive plan a couple of years ago, just recently adopted. And we feel that, basically this has been met. However, for the moment anyways, for the next few years, this law does not have an effect on your comprehensive plan. You don't have to make any changes to that because this essentially grandfathers the comprehensive plan that you have. So more specifically, this provides that the comprehensive plan shall include specific goals, implementation actions, and timeframes for development of low and moderate income housing, which again, your comprehensive plan did address that issue. It establishes an 18-month deadline for a municipality to bring its zoning map into compliance with the future zoning map set forth in the comprehensive plan, and states that a valid comprehensive plan future land use map governs all local decisions, land use decisions. We see this as somewhat problematic for municipalities because existing zoning, is different than future land use zoning. We don't know how this will get worked out in the long run, but this is, this is simply the requirement that they have. This bill also provides that the implementation program in the comprehensive plan must contain a concise strategic plan that details the actions to be accomplished annually to achieve the goals, policies of the plan, as well as the actions. There's also a reporting process in this, as you can see, that on an annual basis, you are to report your status to statewide planning, and that there must be a public meeting process to review that. We don't know if there'll be specific forms or approaches that statewide planning requires as a result of this. That hasn't been provided yet, but we will keep you aware of that as we're going through the process here. This bill also provides that if a municipality fails to fully update or readopt its comprehensive plan within 12 years from the date of the previous plan's adoption, the plan cannot serve as a basis or denial for municipal land use decision. Yours was just adopted, and it was adopted about a year before this. So, so you folks are in good shape on this for the time being, at least. LMI housing. So this one actually, this bill has quite a number of different aspects to it. but it in general amends the Low and Moderate Income LMI Act as it relates to the density and parking requirements and the definition of meeting local needs, appeals of approvals with conditions for profit for-profit developers. It eliminates the master plan stage of review and alters the finding of fact required for decision. So there's a lot of specifics on this, and I don't think it's necessary to burden this particular meeting with all this detail at the moment, but it's here for your review. Key things out of this are the change in the appeals process and the elimination of the master plan review process. So that master plan review process, now you just have preliminary and final stage. There are a few new stipulations in there as to how that works to, I guess hopefully smooth out the process a little bit, but you no longer have a master plan approval process, which I think is pretty significant for most municipalities. Let's see here. These are some additional requirements that are listed for the LMI housing. Another thing that this process changes is the environmental impacts review process. And so you'll see down the bottom of this, the last bullet, that it eliminates one of the required findings for approval so that a finding of no significant negative environmental impacts is no longer required for to approve an application. So this is really just for LMI housing, but I think it is an important thing to consider as you go through here. This bill also, I'm going to go back here. In the bottom bullet on this page, revises the definition of municipal government subsidy, which is required for comprehensive permanent developments to offset differential costs of low and moderate income housing. So, essentially, there are certain things that municipalities are supposed to do to offset the cost of low and moderate income housing. And they're listed here in these sub-bullets. So for properties connected or eligible for connection to public utilities, like water and sewer and so on, density bonus is required of at least 5 units per acre for proposals where at least 25% of the dwelling units are affordable. Where there are 9 units per acre, then the percentage is 50%. And then 12 units for proposals where 100% are affordable. So it increases the density bonuses quite a bit. That's for houses that are connected to utilities, which I know you folks in Portsmouth, you're largely, at least for wastewater, you don't have sewer systems to connect to. But of course, you do have water, public water in a lot of cases. But again, here's for properties not connected either to public water or sewer or both, density bonuses of 3 acres per proposal, where at least 25% of the units are affordable, 5 where it's 50% are affordable, and 8 units, an 8-unit bonus where where 100% of the dwelling units are affordable. Then there are also restrictions that municipalities cannot require more than 1 parking space per dwelling unit for units up to and including 2 bedrooms. Restriction that municipality cannot utilize floor area ratios to limit applications, and a restriction that a municipality cannot limit the number of bedrooms for applications to any less than 3 bedrooms per dwelling unit for single family dwellings. Again, I'm not going to go through the detail on the rest of this at the moment. I know we'll cover that in subsequent meetings, but I did want to make you aware of a few of these things. So adaptive reuse. So the new legislation really is set up to encourage adaptive reuse. And so in general, it encourages conversion of existing commercial buildings to residential and mixed use as a permitted use, placing limitations on municipalities' authority to restrict density and dimension requirements for adaptive reuse projects. So when we're talking about an adaptive reuse project, we're, for example, saying maybe like an old mill building or something like that, which is no longer in use as a mill building, might get converted to some other commercial or residential use, maybe a mixed use or something of that nature. And this bill sets it up so that that's encouraged and that municipalities have less ability to limit that sort of thing. So there are specifics in here as well. This requires that adaptive reuse is allowed by right for a variety of different conversions. And these include offices, schools, religious facilities, medical buildings, and malls into residential units or mixed use developments. And again, that is to be permitted by right. Adaptive reuse developments must include development of at least 50% of the existing floor area into residential units. So they're really trying to set this up to allow for more residential units and especially low and moderate income housing. The only exception to the permitted use is related to environmental land use restrictions. So if, for example, we're talking about something that's a brownfield, then these requirements don't apply. Such developments shall be exempt from all off-street parking requirements of over one space per dwelling unit. It curtails municipal authority to limit density of such developments as follows. So high-density developments of at least 15 dwelling units per an acre are allowed for projects that are limited to a building's footprint, including at least 20% affordable housing, and have access to public utilities or alternative water, service, and wastewater systems. All adaptive reuse projects, the residential density permitted shall be the maximum allowed that will otherwise meet all standards of minimum housing. And it provides that existing building setbacks and height shall remain as considered legally non-conforming. So really some pretty significant changes here. And these will lead to a few different questions for you folks to answer too. We've laid out a few of these policy considerations for you tonight. So one, setting new standards or use of existing standards within the regulations or ordinance. So how you're going to adjust those, that's some decision making that you're going to need to do. Use of the minimum density standards required or that increased density permitted. And what is the new review process for adaptive reuse projects, whether they may be major or minor land developments or whether they fall under development plan review. Zoning Enabling Act. So changes here, amend provisions of the Zoning Enabling Act of 91 related to variances, special use permits, modifications, notice provisions, standard lots of record, and lot merger. And so there are a number of different changes here to consider. This bill amends the standards for granting dimensional variance, specifically eliminating the requirements that hardship doesn't result primarily from the applicant's desire to realize greater financial gain. This clarifies that the applicant would suffer more than a mere inconvenience if the variance were denied by providing that the means, quote, relief sought is minimal to a reasonable enjoyment of the permitted use to which the property is proposed to be devoted. This bill also requires municipalities to allow for granting of special use permits in conjunction with the dimensional variance. Previously, this was optional, but with this change, it's mandatory that it's allowed. Zoning ordinances must now provide for a procedure under which a proposed use that is not specifically listed may be presented to either the zoning board or the local official or agency who's charged with the administration and enforcement. And again, previously this was optional, but now it's required. It requires that the zoning ordinances to provide for specific and objective criteria for issuance of each use category of special use permit. So if a local zoning ordinance does not provide for such criteria, the use is considered to be a permitted use. So in some cases, municipalities have had a lot of wiggle room in their criteria, or maybe lack of clarity in the criteria, or maybe didn't even set specific criteria. That's no longer allowed. If you don't have specific criteria, then the use becomes a permitted use. So municipalities are kind of going through and changing these things as much as they can in cases where there were certain areas that maybe the criteria weren't that clear. In some cases, communities are just simply eliminating those options for special use permits, and they're changing them to either allowed or not allowed. And then we'll probably go back to the drawing board a little bit to consider how to address these things later, so that they don't fall subject to the loss of control over permitted and non-permitted uses. This requires specific and objective criteria to be used by category with the associate uses identified. The specific and objective criteria for any category or use cannot include a determination of consistency with the comprehensive plan. It is assumed to be consistent with the comprehensive plan with the passage of the zoning ordinance allowing for the special use. So that's no longer a criteria, deferring back to the comprehensive plan. Not sure if that's something that Portsmouth has done in the past, but if it is, we'll need to adjust that. This bill also requires municipalities to provide for the issuance of dimensional modifications, which was previously optional, and amends standards for granting those dimensional modifications. There's a list of several items here that are specific about how that works. This bill requires that standard lots of record have proportionally reduced dimensional standards that are equivalent to the proportion of the lot area of the substandard lot to be the minimum lot area required. There's a lot of words for saying there's now proportionality in the dimensional standards that you're required to accept when a smaller lot area has been accepted. This bill provides the merger of lots when the standard lot of record has an area equal to or greater than the area of 50% of the lots within 200 feet of the subject lot, and confirmed by the zoning enforcement officer. So basically, you're required to look at the neighborhood and see whether the existing lot fits within the context of the neighborhood or not, to figure out whether what your merger requirements are. This allows municipalities to permit the alteration of non-conforming development that is established by variance or special use permit by either special use permit or by right. So a few questions that come out of this bill that you'll need to consider is how uses are not specifically listed, are going to be classified within the existing table of uses and the zoning board and by the zoning board or the zoning official. What are the categories of special uses with specific and objective criteria? Are dimensional modifications permitted at the 15%, which is the minimum required, or at the higher percentage up to 25%? So you have some flexibility there. Are modifications of less than 5% granted without notice? Or do you want to review those? Do you want to permit the alteration of non-conforming development that was established by variance? These are all some of the these are some of the policy considerations that you'll need to think of as we're moving through this process. Land development and subdivision. So this bill amends the Land Use and Subdivision Review Act of 92 related to the role of the Planning Board, Technical Review Committee, the Administrative Officer, and it amends the definition and processes for land development projects and development plan review and requires unified development review. So this eliminates the zoning board as the planning board of appeal with respect to development approvals. This is a pretty big change. Let's see, it broadens the authority of the AO, who is the administrative officer, to review and approve qualified applications, and expands who can be considered an AO and permits more than one person may be designated as the AO. Development plan review remains optional and provides a list of development types that can be chosen from to be permitted and allowed under DPR. This bill also defines and standardizes the process for DPR, and that some developments are now subject to the land development project review, multi-stage review process with multiple public hearings, could be reviewed under the DPR framework. And again, it has some very specific things for the DPR framework. I'm not going to go through them all tonight, but we will go through them in more detail as we move through this process. Let's see, this also standardizes the review and approval process for projects subject to DPR. Municipalities must identify the permitting authority for DPR, either as the administrative officer, the planning board, or the technical review committee. Further, municipalities must specify categories of projects that are eligible for administrative review and the project categories that are required to be heard by the planning board and technical review committee. The administrative DPR is a single stage review now. It's required to be that way. Formal DPR has 2 stages, preliminary and final. Again, no master plan is allowed anymore. That's no longer a stage. Municipality can no longer require both DPR and land development review for the same project. It used to be that you could do that. This provides a standard for specific definition of the land development project or the LDP. Let's see, community, I should have probably, so just going over that definition in very sort of, the broader level strokes here. So the land development project is defined as follows. It's a project which one or more lots, tracts, or parcels of land or a portion thereof are developed or redeveloped as a coordinated site for one or more uses, units, or structures, including but not limited to the planned development or cluster development for residential, commercial, institution, recreational, open space, mixed uses. It also has minor, land development project, and that's defined as a land development project involving the following, and it lists out a number of different criteria here, which this includes, which minor LDP includes. A community can increase but not decrease the thresholds for minor land development set forth above if specifically set forth in the local ordinance. And then there's definition for major land development, which is as follows. So this is specific, you can't alter this. The land development project which exceeds the threshold for minor development project is set forth in this section, and local ordinance or regulation, and the process by which the land development projects are reviewed by the local planning board, commission, technical review committee, or administrative officer. That's set forth now in 452339 of state statutes. So you have to follow that process. This bill revises the definition of a subdivision and changes the definition of a major and minor subdivision. So minor subdivision is now considered any subdivision that is 9 or fewer buildable lots, and a major subdivision is, as you might imagine, 10 or more. This also alters the review and approval process for all application types, including DPR, subdivisions, land development projects. And so it splits up into minor subdivisions and major, which I think is on the next page here. And then revises the definition of subdivisions and changes the definition of the major and minor subdivisions, which we just went over. This also alters the review and approval process for all application types. This appears to be a duplicate slide, so I apologize for that. Here we go. Here's the major subdivision that I was looking for. This lays out the changes to major subdivision review also. So a requirement for public informational meeting at the master plan stage has been removed and replaced with public hearing requirement at this stage. The preliminary plan stage no longer requires a public hearing, but does require public notice prior to the first hearing. And the first hearing is required for abutters. The administrative officer is empowered to combine review phases if desired, and the deadline for certification of completeness of the final plan applications is reduced to 25 days to 15 days, with an extension to 25 days if needed. The deadline for certification of completeness is reduced from 14 to 10 days. So you are constrained in how quickly you need to review these. This bill also requires that municipalities adopt the Unified Development Review, which empowers planning boards to grant zoning relief as part of an application for land development. This procedure was adopted in 2016 as an option for municipalities, but is now required. So there are a number of policy questions and considerations that come out of this particular bill. Who's going to serve as your administrative officer, your AO? Do you assign the title to just one person, or do you want to do it with more than one person? DPR is optional, so do you want to implement the DPR as a review procedure? And which categories of development permitted to be reviewed under DPR do you want to include? Who is to be permitted, the permitting authority for formal DPR, whether that's technical review committee or the planning board? What's eligible for administrative DPR versus formal DPR? Minor land development thresholds or minimums. Do you want to increase these thresholds to allow your administrative officer to review and approve more types and sizes of projects, and thereby limit the number of things that you have to hear before any of your boards. Who is assigned to sit on a TRC? Is it members of the public? Since members of the public are now permitted to sit as members of the TRC process. If the AO is permitted to provide waivers from regulations, what specific items can they waive? Who will review and approve final plans and minor subdivisions of the land development projects? Is that going to be the TRC or the administrative officer? And what constitutes a minor subdivision versus major subdivision, major change? And with that, I know that's a lot of information, but I'll open it up to questions and comments. And again, I want to emphasize, we're not asking anybody to make these, judgments on these policy considerations at this point, but just to introduce the ideas of them to you so that you're able to, have some time to percolate on them, because we know they're complex. And with that, I'll kick it back to you, Leah.
Thank you very much for that detailed presentation. Does anybody from the planning board have any questions, comments?
It's a lot to digest, but if there's any preliminary questions from the board, I see none. How about our,
Turn it over to the zoning
Zoning.
board. Audience members? Wow, geez. Those online, virtually raise your hand and I can elevate you to talk. This is what Jim and I live for, my God.
I think it's like was said, it's a lot to digest. And so as we get into more specifics and drill down on some of these things a little bit more, I bet people will have more questions.
Well, everybody does have a copy of your presentation, Jim. Thank you very much. We will be meeting again in the same sort of style next week. Maybe we can provide your presentation earlier for everybody to flip through, and maybe they'll have some questions for your current presentation at next week's meeting once they've been able to sleep on this very entertaining subject matter.
Is that to imply they're not sleeping right now?
Everybody's wide awake,
Excellent.
yeah, we're with you.
bushy-eyed.
Yeah, I forgot to ask Kevin, our solicitor. Do you have any comments, Kevin? Okay. So Jim, thank you very much. We'll look forward to continuing to work with you. Glad you're back with us. Very successful time the last time, so looking forward to it this time as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed last time around. Like you, looking forward to it this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
See you later. And you're very
All right.
welcome.
So that officially closes the workshop piece, correct? And we'll move into the planning board regular agenda. For those that want to stick around, feel free. Otherwise, you can exit the building as well. It's up to you.
Good evening.
All right, first up is the approval of minutes for the planning board meeting of January 10th, 2024. What is your pleasure?
I would like to make a motion that we accept the minutes as written.
Second.
All right, got a motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? And I also will abstain because I wasn't there, so I will call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, minutes are adopted. Next up is applicants Yang and Zin, owner Jarden Holdings LLC, AP 62 Lot 6, being 272 Glen Farm Road. The applicant requests a concept plan review to create an 11-lot subdivision. The applicant's representative requested a continuance to the March 13th planning board docket. So what is your pleasure, board?
I would like to make a motion that we grant and bump this down to the March 13th, 2024 planning board meeting and put on that.
Is there a second? Mr. Garceau. All right, any discussion on the motion? Go ahead. Well, we got to vote first.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Harding, you had a comment?
And just, Leah, if I'm not mistaken, this piece of property came up in the past 2 or 3 times. And we gave them, if I'm not mistaken, approval for something, and they had said, if you approve this, you're never gonna come back for anything more. And then they came another time, and it wasn't that big of a deal. I believe we somehow had, I believe we gave them the okay, but it was promised they would never come back again. And
But I don't want to get
Yeah,
into.
let's not get into that tonight.
To
Yeah.
the history, but you know, should they move forth on March 13th, I will provide the history of the project.
Okay, perfect.
thank you.
All right, we also have the February 14th monthly project status report on administrative subdivisions, plat plan, recording, et cetera. What is your pleasure?
Make a motion to put it on file.
Receive and place on file. Do you have a second? Mr. Harding, second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, how about if we move for adjournment? Mr. Harding? Ms. Wilson, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next Wednesday, just to start working through some of these, because we got a June deadline.